Night-nights.
I like to do night-nights.
Night-nights are the best.
But
This is Cranberry Christmas. You could do your night-nights right now if you'd like.
No.
You want to read instead?
Oh, no,
All right.
no.
You already did your night-night.
No.
Okay, we'll read Cranberry Christmas.
This is like too much noise.
Does it look like too much noise?
No.
It looks like it?
It looks like too much noise because that guy is angry.
Oh, that angry guy. Yeah, there was a shouting man and too much noise, wasn't there? Christmas was coming. Snow was on the cranberry bog, the smell of pine in the wind, and the freshwater pond frozen smooth. Mr. Whiskers! That's his name. Looking out from his kitchen window was deep in gloom. Christmas was only 3 days away, and his pond should have been filled with skaters. Skaters in bright sweaters, laughing with their scarves flying in the wind. What? And he should have been there teaching them all to twirl and do figure eights. But old Cyrus Grape had changed all that. That's who that man is, Cyrus Grape.
Now, why is he angry?
I don't know yet. I haven't read this. He had moved next door to Mr. Whiskers into the stone house on the rise. I think that's... Is that up there? Wait a minute. Which one is Mr. Whiskers' house? I guess Mr. Whiskers' house is the gray one. So I guess that would be the stone house on the rise. And he claimed that the pond was on his land. Cyrus didn't like children. That's why he's yelling. He doesn't like kids. Whenever he saw them on the pond, he would hop on his sled and slide bumpity-bump down the hill. "Scat! Off my pond or I'll have the sheriff after you," Cyrus would shout as he shook his cane and chased the skaters into the snowy banks. "It's my pond, you old scoundrel! Mine!" Mr. Whiskers would boom back. Boom back. But when the old sea captain searched through the attic, the desk, and the cellar of his little gray cottage, he could find nothing to prove that he owned the pond. He began to wonder if he did own the pond. Mr. Whiskers brooded, Cyrus Grape cackled, and the little children sadly hung up their skates. Today there were new troubles for Mr. Whiskers. A letter from his persnickety sister Sarah in the city announced that she was coming for Christmas, and after the holidays she expected him to come back to the city to live with her. "You can't take care of yourself. Your house looks like a shipwreck and your money box is always empty," she scolded in her letter. Mr. Whiskers frowned. He liked the way he took care of himself. In the summer he clammed and felt the water and sand on his bare feet. In the winter, he ice skated with the children all around him like a school of fish. To think of leaving Cranberryport, the idea of living in the city with Sarah and her striped cat made Mr. Whiskers furious. Fuming, he took his troubles to Maggie and Grandmother, who lived in a farmhouse on the other side of the dunes. "Suffering codfish, what can I do?" He waved his letter in their kitchen. When Grandmother heard Mr. Whiskers' news, she held her head, a guest at Mr. Whiskers' jumbled house. "You haven't borrowed my broom since summer," she chided. "I sweep in the spring," said Mr. Whiskers, looking at the ceiling. Grandmother shook her head. She and Maggie didn't waste time. Mr. Whiskers certainly needed help. In a few minutes, loaded with Grandmother's soap and polish and bristling with brooms and brushes, all three took the path to Mr. Whiskers' house, over the dunes on the ocean side. They went to work. How they worked! Maggie washed the windows. Get something else. Get something else. You're not getting that. Maggie washed the windows. Mr. Whiskers scrubbed the floor. Grandmother dusted and gave orders. What's this behind the couch?" "Lobster pots," Mr. Whiskers answered. "What's in this in the bathtub?" "My shell collection," growled Mr. Whiskers. "Out with them all," ordered Grandmother. Mr. Whiskers grumbled about persnickety sisters and certain grandmothers, but he did as he was told. It was at the end of the second day of helping Mr. Whiskers that the accident happened. Maggie had trimmed the pine tree and baked her favorite cranberry cookies. She had just put the last pan away when she heard a loud crash in the pantry. Shh! No fussing about shoes. Put it on or don't. Suddenly, there were Mr. Whiskers' feet sticking right through the ceiling. Maggie raced upstairs. "Poor Mr. Whiskers!" With help from Maggie, he groaned and pulled himself up. It was then that Maggie spied the dusty black and gold box between the floor and ceiling. You have to wait till we finish the story. Carefully, they pulled it out into the light. "A treasure, Mr. Whiskers," said Maggie with shining eyes. "Not in my house," sighed Mr. Whiskers as he carried the box downstairs. He was right. It was filled with photographs and dusty old papers. But long after Maggie left, Mr. Whiskers was still studying the papers in the orange light of afternoon. He opened the last stiff parchment and began to smile. Now he chuckled. Then he slapped his knee and shouted, "Suffering codfish!" Christmas Eve brought a light snow to Cranberryport, and the smell of the sea was in the air. Mr. Whisker's sister, Sarah, a round, brown-eyed woman with a flowered bag, arrived from the train station in Cranberryport's only taxi cab.
That looks like a fire truck.
It does kind of look like a fire truck. It's an old taxi, though. It's an old taxi cab.
It looks like
But
a
it's red.
car.
It's red because this is Cranberryport. So I think lots of things are red in Cranberryport, where Mr. Whiskers lives, because cranberries are red and Christmassy. Mr. Whiskers hugged her and introduced Sarah all around. She turned and stared at the cottage. "How clean your windows are, brother. I love to shine the blinking things," he boomed. Grandmother sniffed, and Maggie laughed. What? What do you see? Wait a second. Whoa, don't... Oh, okay. But when Sarah went inside the cottage, she could scarcely believe her eyes. She had never seen such a beautiful sight. The wooden table was polished and set with holly and red candles. And the Christmas tree! It was a celebration of seashells. There had been no money for ornaments, so Maggie and Mr. Whiskers had painted the shell collection. It glistened...
We're going to do a big juicy.
We're only halfway through the story. It glistened with silver and gold. There were chains of snail shells, silver clam shells, and a golden starfish at the top. Sarah...
I like that pear.
Oh, you like that pear? Sarah clapped her hands. "Brother, you're a wonder."
I like to get that apple.
This looks pretty good. Sorry, I had to cough.
Then I'll get that orange one.
Yum, yum. Mr. Whiskers smiled behind his whiskers. The night was a triumph, from the supper of clam chowder, grandmother's famous bread, hot spiced cider, and Maggie's cranberry cookies to the singing of carols around the old piano. Mr. Whiskers pretended to cover his ears when grandmother trilled on the high notes. They're singing Christmas carols, like "Jingle Bells" or "Deck the Halls with Boughs," all those kinds of Christmassy songs. And there were gifts from the old sea captain, a sea-worn bottle, blue as a sapphire, for grandmother, a giant pink shell for Maggie, and a small ivory box for Sarah. Sarah dipped into her flowered bag and presented her brother with a new red knitted scarf and mittens. It was midnight. As Maggie left, Mr. Whiskers whispered into her car that the children of Cranberryport should be at the pond at noon tomorrow. He winked in a most mysterious way. Christmas afternoon was cold and bright. Mr. Whiskers What are you singing, Sandra? Mr. Whiskers darted among the skaters and had just stopped to catch his breath when he heard the voice of Cyrus Grape. "Arrest them all, Sheriff!" Behind Cyrus stood a tall man with a broad-brimmed hat. There were screams as the skaters fled in every direction, all except Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers pretended he hadn't heard a thing. He skated, he whirled, and then he stretched his arms and glided like a great black whiskered bird. Mr. Grape's face grew red. "Off to jail with you," Cyrus screeched, pulling the sheriff after Mr. Whiskers. "I'm skating on my own pond, you old fraud," cried Mr. Whiskers, turning and slowing down until he faced Cyrus Grape. Slowly, triumphantly, he reached into the pocket of his brass-buttoned coat and drew out a yellowed, red-sealed paper and waved it under Cyrus Grape's long nose. He handed it to the sheriff. The sheriff studied it carefully and looked at Mr. Grape. "This paper proves that the pond belongs to Mr. Whiskers," he said. "You, sir, are Uh-oh. You, sir... Oh, jeez. Oh, wow. What a smooch. "You, sir, are trespassing on Mr. Whiskers' pond." Cyrus Grape turned a deeper red and roared with rage. He wound his muffler...
I'm going to do a juicy smooch.
Not another juicy smooch. I can't... Oh, jeez. Oh, wow. what a girl. Okay, good job. Okay, that's too much. That's too much. That's too much. Oh, thank you. He wound a muffler around his face and started up the rise to his house, pulling his sled behind him. Mr. Whiskers turned to the children and raised his hand for silence. My pond is yours, to skate on whenever you like. Merry Christmas to everyone. The crowd cheered. Sarah whispered to him, my goodness, you certainly can take care of yourself. And all of Cranberryport, too.
Who's that?
That's Mr. Whiskers. Mr. Whiskers offered his arm to Maggie for a turn on the ice. They skated off joyfully. That's his sister Sarah. She wanted to make him come live with her because she thought he could not take care of himself in his house. I'm a wonder, he said to Maggie, and even the Whiskers couldn't hide the smile on Mr. Whiskers' face.
That's it.
That's the end.
That's it.
But it has a recipe for the cranberry cookies. So if you'd like to make the cranberry cookies, maybe at Christmas time, you can make the cranberry cookies that Mr. Whiskers had for Christmas.
I know how to make the cranberry cookies.
All right, we'll try to remember that next Christmas.